Kayla, call the roll.
Thank you, Linda Diane. I will now call the roll of the Transportation Commission. I have received regrets from the following commissioners who are not able to join us this evening. Commissioner Margolis has a conflicting meeting, and Commissioner Sims is out of town. So please say here when your name is called. Councilmember Ackerman? Commissioner Boland?
Here.
Commissioner Felt?
Here.
Commissioner Fern?
Here.
Commissioner Gordon?
Here.
Commissioner Hull?
Here.
Commissioner Kleinman? Commissioner Nahidi? Commissioner Parsons?
Here.
Commissioner Trudeau?
Here.
Sergeant Bill Cock?
Here.
Commissioner Dolan?
Here.
Commissioner Hess?
Here.
Commissioner Lazarus?
Here.
Commissioner Webb? We do have a quorum. Close.
All right. Then the first item is public comment, and we allow 2 minutes for each. Is it 2 minutes or 3 minutes?
3 minutes.
It says 2 minutes in the agenda, but it's actually 3. 3 minutes for each person, and Kayla will keep time. So if there's anybody like to speak, please sign in, and you have our attention. No one wants to speak. Okay. Then I'll close down public commentary, and we want to approve the agenda. Any changes or corrections to the agenda? Then I'll take a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved and seconded by,
Trudeau.
okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, we have an agenda. I did that in the wrong order, but that's okay. It's been a long day. Next, we have approval of minutes. And so are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Then I'll take a motion to approve the minutes. And, okay. Parsons? Okay, and seconded by? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We have our minutes. All right. So the first item is to go into information and discussion. And we're talking about Hoover Main Estate.
Good evening. I'm Chris Wall with Wade Trim. As part of the project management contract we have with the city, we were assigned the Hoover Green and Hill project, and I'm here to provide an update on that project. The project limits are Hoover from Main to State Street. It also includes Green from Hill Street south to Kipke, as well as a portion of Hill Street between Green and 5th Street. There's also, you see a little red circle down at the bottom at Keach, working with some of our coordination with U of M. They're interested in looking to see if there's some ways that we can slow traffic and improve the pedestrian safety down in that curve at Keach and Green. So a main overview of the project, high level, is we have a water main improvement and upgrade from 6-inch to 12-inch for majority of, or the entire length of Hoover, as well as a portion of Hill Street. We have, as part of that, we have 2 utility crossings that go underneath the train track. We also have some stormwater enhancements. We have an allocation of about $700,000 for stormwater improvements as part of the Allen Creek watershed. And we also are doing road resurfacing on Green and on Hill and that portion of Hoover. We're also looking at upgrading the ramps where needed to ADA American with Disabilities Act compliance. We're also coordinating with U of M. As I said, there's a few areas that we're looking at doing some improvements. Another portion that's being considered is a segment of water main on Green from Hoover south to Kipke. U of M is considering upgrading that part of the water main as part of this project. As well as we're doing a lot of coordination with a variety of team members, including the transportation team. So we might have some additional improvements once we work with the team a little bit more in that regard. Funding, we're using, this is all part of the capital improvement plan. We have water funds, stormwater funds, and road resurfacing monies in this project. I have a few pictures of existing conditions. On Green, the picture on the left shows that curve at Kipke and Keach with crosswalks on the left and the right side of the road, but there's no crosswalk going across Green. So that's an expressed interest by U of M to get people back and forth between those parking lots. On the right side is a poor quality picture of Green, north of Hoover, which is basically represents it's a 2-lane road, 1 lane in both directions, no bike lanes. It's more of a residential feel with sidewalks on both sides. It's a rather narrow roadway through there. Then there's Hill, which is on the north side of the project limits. This has, the picture on the left shows crosswalks across Hill as well as across Green. We also have a train track crossing, both pedestrian and vehicles on the right side. Hill has bike lanes on both sides of the road. A couple pictures of Hoover. Hoover is 1 lane in both directions with bike lanes on both sides. There is a segment between Green and the train tracks. On the north side of the road, there's on-street parking, and there's no bike lane through there. It's right now, it's share the road through that segment. So we're looking at options of maybe removing that, but we still have to discuss that with stakeholders. And the reason to remove the on-street parking would be to, continue that bike lane all the way through. Another photo of Hoover, a little bit further east. This is in front of the some of the U of M buildings, showing some of the crosswalks. Again, it has bike lanes on both sides. Even further east on Hoover, some more bike lanes. You can see on that, this is looking kind of southwest towards the U of M buildings. There's current bike facilities there, as well as a bus shelter. So in review of this project, we also looked at some of our transportation framework guidelines that we have, the non-motorized plan from 2013, as well as the tree line master plan from 2017, as well as engaging the transportation team. They also did a road safety audit recently. It's at State and Hoover. So that's something that we're looking at to see what we can add into this project. In regards to the non-motorized plan, shows it kind of difficult, but this it's not super clear. There's a little yellow bubble on the bottom that's supposed to circle Hoover. Hoover was considered a tier 1 priority in that non-motorized plan. The image on the right side shows the near-term opportunities of putting those bike lanes on that facility. That has been done. So we accomplished that goal of the non-motorized plan. And as part of this project, we propose to continue to keep those facilities. The tree line master plan from 2017 was broken down into 2 zones over this project. Zone 6 is the one that covers Green. Green is at the top of that image. It goes left and right. Hoover goes down from that spot. You see that peach line. That peach line represents bikeway, I can't remember it's the name for it exactly, but on-street 2-lane cycle track. Thank you. And so that is to extend from Hill Street, go south on Green. Once it gets to Hoover, then it's supposed to turn and go east on Hoover all the way to State Street. So the next image is Zone 7, which continues that cycle track east along Hoover until it intersects State Street. and then takes State Street and goes south. As part of the tree line master plan, there was a concept cross-section on the left side that shows the ideal or desired rendering of what this road might look like with the cycle track adjacent to it with some buffers between them. Given how tight we are with the curb lines and the sidewalks, that type of desired cross-section won't fit on the corridors of Green or Hoover. So the image on the lower right is something that is probably a little bit more applicable. That is from Smith Group JJR rendering that they are working with the DDA for William Street. That's a little bit narrow cross-section, narrow road lanes, as well as a narrower cycle track with a 3-foot, 2-foot buffer zone. So we wanted to test out what we could fit or with minimal impacts to try to implement that tree line on Green and Hoover. And this image represents the overlay of that narrower cross-section on Green. And the red line that you see that strikes across the top, that happens to be the west side of the road, that is shows the impacts of where we'll have to remove curbs, sidewalks, and the trees to implement that. So currently, it's not within the scope of the resurfacing project for Green. So right now, it's not being included in the resurfacing of this project. This image is of Hoover. It goes from the west side of Hoover in the upper left all the way to east to the lower right side. The red line again represents where all the curbs would have to be removed. We'd have to encroach a little bit into the sidewalks and remove some of the trees there, most likely to implement that tree line section. So again, it's not within the current scope of the resurfacing or utility project, so it's not being carried forward at this point. What is being carried forward in the proposed layout is using cross-section of 11-foot travel lanes as a minimum. We do have bus traffic on portion of Green as well as Hoover, so we need to make sure we can navigate the buses through there. We will continue to have 5-foot wide bike lanes on Hoover. Also, that because Hill has bike lanes on it and Hoover has bike lanes on it, there's that little segment of Green that could benefit from having a connection to those both of those bike lane facilities. So we're considering using sharrows on Green so people can navigate that a little bit easier. We're also going to update the ramps, some of the crosswalks, and also seek additional input from the transportation team. So this just shows some general layouts of all these streets. This represents the Green and Hill. Hill is on the right side. It basically maintains all the facilities that are there today. Green has the exact same road configuration that it has today. The addition, though, that is shown has sharrows on it. This is a segment of Green going south to Keach and Kipke, and this has the same configuration it has today, although once you get down to Kipke, this is where we're proposing to put in a crosswalk in coordination with U of M. So again, to get people back and forth. Right now, there's a lot of crossing of the road, and it's really not controlled at all, so it's not a safe environment. And if anybody's been out there before, if you've ever watched cars drive that curve, sometimes every other car you can hear the tires kind of squeal a little bit, just because it's just natural to kind of go fast down that road, and then all of a sudden you're taking a very sharp curve. So to help moderate that traffic, in the upper left portion of that of the image, there's this hatched yellow area of the road, and we're in talks with U of M to possibly do a raised intersection at the north entrance. So vehicles would kind of drive up that island, so there'd be a physical deflection of the vehicle driving over that, which is basically like a speed bump, so it would slow vehicles down. There's also consideration of, it's very hard to see, but the lower left, there's like a little stairwell. If you've ever walked down that sidewalk past the football stadium, coming down south to Kipke, if you wanted to turn into the sidewalk or into the parking lot, U of M's parking lot's off of Kipke, there's actually no sidewalk there because the grade is so steep through there. So we're looking at evaluating putting in a stairwell through there. Now I'm going to just walk through Hoover. Hoover, again, would maintain the bike lanes in the road. Really no change in the configuration of the road other than at Green on the northwest corner, where we're looking at redoing that curb line on the north side to try to bring it down south a little bit, so it's a shorter distance to cross the road. If you're driving west on Hoover and you stop at that intersection, it's almost like there's a right turn lane. It just kind of doesn't line up with the road going across, so this will help line that road up and also minimize the crossing distance. Further east on Hoover, we're showing bike lanes on both sides of the road here. This is a segment between the Green and the train tracks where currently there's parking on the road there. So that's, again, something that we have to talk with some of the stakeholders there to get buy-in on that. The remaining portion further to the east on Hoover is basically the same configuration that you see today. And then this is the last segment over towards State Street. Again, same configuration that you basically see today with the bike lanes on the facility. The intersection at State and Hoover, we're looking at also trying to improve the crosswalks across State Street. Right now, I think one goes into a driveway of a house. So moving forward, we're going to do a lot more additional coordination with the city transportation team, utility teams, public works, also U of M. We're waiting word to see if U of M is interested in pursuing that water main on the south portion of Green, as well as other stakeholders. We're further refine our design, and also the schedule is looking towards bidding the project at the beginning of the year so we can construct it next year. So there'll be a lot of tight coordination with all the activities that occur at U of M in that area next year. So, are there any questions? Well, I thank you very much for your time. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So thank you for the overview here. I don't have too much. I don't have too many questions. I'll say it's sort of understandable but disappointing that we can't follow the tree line plan, but I can see there's not the right of way there to make it easy, and it's out of scope for resurfacing. That makes sense. One question I had is, so is 11 feet lane width sort of because there's bus service, that's the target we're shooting for? Or is it possible to go narrower, or is that, I'm just curious where that target comes from?
So on streets that we don't have a lot of buses on, we might be able to facilitate 10 feet.
Yeah.
Knowing that we have a lot of bus movement through there, 1 foot wider provides a little bit more maneuverability for the buses and a little bit safer maneuvering of the buses, but I guess that's something we can talk to transportation team about and see if there is any refinement on that.
Yeah, and again, I'm not an expert on that, but I like whatever we can do to keep things moving slow, like is generally the direction I think this commission has liked to see. And I don't know that the 2 feet is going to buy us enough right away to do something a little bit more bold with the bike lane infrastructure, but those striped lanes are sort of they're good, but not. It'd be nice to be making improvements and not just kind of holding the status quo. And I'm enthusiastic to see the idea of the raised intersection as a strategy to slow down traffic coming around that curve. I'm wondering if that sort of traffic calming technique was something we looked at for maybe integrating green in I don't know, one thing, that might be one way to make it feel like traffic is entering a slower space, so if it's a shared mode space, because there's not room on green for, separated cycling infrastructure to kind of signal that to people driving through. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that would be one.
Is there a
question I
specific
have.
location that you were thinking
Well,
of?
so you talked about green between Hill and Hoover as sort of a connector.
Yeah.
So there would be those two intersections at either end. And I don't know if that makes sense. I haven't looked at this in close enough detail, but that's just sort of one of the questions that popped into my mind before I even brought up the Keach or Kipke, I think it's
Keach, yep,
segment.
at the north gate, yep.
Yeah.
So talking raised intersections.
Yeah, or
along
something like,
Green.
something like that to kind of, if it's going to be shared mode mixed, like recognizing it's a natural sort of connection between those two cycling routes. Is there anything above and beyond just sharrows, which are literally the least we can do? So, yeah, so that's my only feedback, and otherwise, yeah, thanks for the overview.
Sure, and I'll be happy to talk through that with the transportation team.
Any other questions? Yes.
I just had a question about sequencing, and I know you have stakeholder meetings pending, but there's a major development that's going to be going in between Hoover, Green, Brown, and Davis.
Yeah, 151,
Yeah, so
Hoover.
I imagine that would need to be a stakeholder you need to engage, just because I'd hate to see the roads ripped up and replaced and then ripped up again.
Yep.
That's terrific. The other is, I assume, more meetings with the University of Michigan. You're completing work with the intramural building, but there are a number of other older office buildings down there, and again, would hate to see construction rip up roads that were just replaced, so.
Yeah, in terms of 151, we've been contacted by their engineer. We've coordinated water main improvements, and I know that they're going to be going through, and I'm not sure exactly of the timing, but most likely they'll probably be a little bit ahead of this project, so they'll probably be patching the road, and then when our project comes along, we'll take out those patches and resurface in that
Okay.
area.
So hopefully not seeing any utility cuts?
Right, that's the goal.
All right.
Yep.
So it's a noble goal.
Yeah,
I encourage you to meet it.
yes,
All right,
thank you, we will.
So I got a very specific question and then sort of larger, more general sort of thoughts. One is that the diagram, Hoover at State, I think that bike lane continues on now, according to the plan, whereas now it disappears.
Mhm.
So it'd be great if it could continue on.
Okay,
So we could take a look into that. The larger sort of question, so Keach and Kipke are really popular bicycle routes. If you look on the Strava data maps, you'll see that it's a very bright way through that cyclists use, and part of that is because it's flat. This is a corridor that is really popular for cyclists to avoid hills. And with that in mind, and also in combination with the tree line identifying Hoover, which is also very popular, I'm curious what engineers or planners with expertise chimed in on this project, and where does that fit?
in terms of which, who was in,
Just in terms of somebody with an expertise in active transportation, looking at the plan and saying, hey, what could we possibly do? I like the idea of the raised intersections and possibly sharrows, but there's other treatments that are out there and available, bike boxes, for instance, at State and Hoover. You know, there's a lot of ways to do, I think, what UNUM want to do.
Mhm.
I'm just wondering if somebody with that advanced knowledge might be able to help the project.
Currently, we've been coordinating with people internal to the city. If there's anybody in particular that you would suggest, I'd be happy to reach out to those people.
It would be outside of the city, but the folks that the DDA worked with seem to have a pretty good grasp on
Talking tool?
not necessarily best practices. I can get you a name, though. I'm sure that Kayla could get you a name. I think there's a lot of promise, and there's already a lot of bicyclists there, and it's potentially going to be part of tree line the alternative route anyway. Like, it'd be really nice to get some creative, at least options on the table to consider with the right-of-way constraints.
Okay. I can reach out to Kayla and Raymond.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much
Thank you.
for the update. Great. So next we have a presentation on the bike share. Glad that you were able to make it.
Down, down, there. Thank you, Kayla. We're glad to be here, too. We've been putting this off for the right time to actually come before the commission and give you a presentation on the relaunch of the Arbor bike system. I'm Chris Simmons. I'm the Business Services Program Manager for the ride. How this lines up with business services is I actually deal a lot with individual choices as it regards mode, and the connection between bike and bus is one of the reasons that the ride is involved with this project. We are taking the lead on behalf of the civic partners who are behind Arbor Bike at its inception and now again at the relaunch. So the City of Ann Arbor Downtown Development Authority, and the University of Michigan. We've all come back together again saying that this is a valued asset for the community, and we're working our way through to get it to a relaunch as soon as possible. We wanted to reiterate why we still think bike share makes sense for Ann Arbor. Specifically, there is enough density and enough population and enough bicycle usage that we certainly think all the factors still remain as they did in 2012 and 2013 when this project was originally pitched, to continue to try and make this project work. The demographics, if anything, have gone more in the favor of these sorts of projects. The environment has certainly moved in favor of shared mode projects, and so we certainly think there is reason to continue operating a bike share program. Initially, just because I know there was some confusion on this, this was launched with a $600,000 federal investment in the capital for the program, capital being the docks and the bikes and the associated equipment, with the match coming from the City of Ann Arbor, along with a 3-year operational funding agreement with the University of Michigan to support the original operator of the program. That led to a partial season 2014 launch that gave basically a test to the mode as being the first bike share program to operate in Michigan. From 2015 through 2017, you see there just a brief overview of how the system operated. From the partner standpoint, there were reasons to say success, and there were certainly reasons to say that there were some concerns as to how the program would continue to operate. The partners in negotiation with the previous operator then shifted at the end of 2017. And the ride, as the lead for the partners, took possession of the program and have been searching for the operator to be able to continue operations going forward. We don't think we are the best positioned agency to directly operate a bike share program. And so with the advice and consent of all of the partners in the process, opened up a full procurement. We had 6 proposals received in that process from around the country, and we did not predicate exactly what that bike share program was going to look like at the opposite side of that procurement. We honestly said, give us your best design for this program. Here are our constraints. Tell us how we make a bike share program work best here in Ann Arbor. Partners were on the evaluation. We heard from all 6 of those proposers in one fashion or another, but we were really focusing at the end of the day on what was going to make a program successful. And successful in our mind is a program that is well used, well received, and is actually an increase in mobility options that allows the community to continue to move without having to move in a single occupant vehicle. At the end of that process, we selected Shift Transit LLC as our operator. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in the process here in a moment, but We selected Shift collectively for their enthusiasm for bike share projects, and I think after you listen to Eddie, you'll understand why. Their experience in improving existing systems, they have a track record of coming into programs and making them much larger, much faster than they had been previously under previous operators, as well as a good holistic approach to taking a bike share system and understanding its use in the ecosystem, where people will be interested in bike share as a optional mode or a preferred mode, and ways to make sure that the rider gets the best experience on the product. I think for those of us who are in any form of transportation operations, you have to understand that you have to look at it from the rider's perspective, and we felt they gave the best understanding within the constraints that we gave them of what that experience could and should look like. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions from the partner standpoint, but I'm going to turn this over to Eddie Inlow, the CEO of Shift, and let him introduce the company from there.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to the commission for having us. We're thrilled to be here today. I have Becky, our Director of Operations, and Omari, our Regional General Manager, both local to Michigan, currently reside here, and we're obviously thrilled to helping work with the City of Ann Arbor and Chris to relaunch the program successfully and hopefully grow the program in the future and allow folks of Ann Arbor to get around, as Chris mentioned, in some way other than motor vehicles. A little bit about Shift. We're headquartered in Chicago. We have 110 employees. We currently operate 4 bike share programs in North America. We have launched from scratch the program in Detroit, just down the road, where Omari is our general manager. We also launched the Tucson, Arizona program from scratch with the partnership of Mayor Rothschild and the Department of Transportation. As Chris mentioned, we also have taken over programs in Toronto. When we took over the Toronto program about 2 years ago, there's 200 stations. Since then, we have helped the city to expand that up to 360 stations. We've also doubled user revenue ridership through marketing programs, outreach, social media, customer experience, et cetera. We've also taken over the program in Chattanooga, Tennessee over a year ago. We've recently launched electronic pedal assist bikes down there. The pedal assist bikes in Chattanooga, Tennessee are getting about 5x the ridership of our traditional bikes. So as Chris mentioned, we like to go into cities that have existing programs. We like to work with the local partners and get people on bicycles. That's what we intend to do here. Aside from bike share, we also are in other parts of the shared use mobility economy. We're the operators of the Car2Go program in Chicago, Illinois, where we have 400 vehicles there as well. Just launched that pilot program with the partnership of the Mayor's Office and the Department of Transportation there as well. A few months ago, Becky is the lead executive on that program for us, and it's launched to some good success. A little bit of a background on kind of the weight behind our programs. Other than the 110 employees we have across North America, our riders have taken over 1.95 million rides already in 2018. With the addition of the Ann Arbor program, we very much look forward to doing more than 2 million in 2019. As I mentioned, I'm sure it's perked a lot of eyes. We do operate the MOGO program on behalf of Lisa Skowski, Downtown Detroit Partnership, the DOT, and the Mayor's Office in Detroit. We have 44 stations there and 430 bikes. We've already announced in the press that we'll be expanding that program by 30 more stations in early 2019, which we're very excited about. The program has been off to what I would say, and I think the city would also say, is an unqualified success. Over 50,000 rides alone in 2018 so far, and 2,800 members. We've already had conversations with Lisa, who is the program head for MOGO. I think there's a lot of creative things we can do in terms of working with Arbor Bike and MOGO together in terms of memberships, synergies, et cetera, as a regional bike share program in the future. So we're very much looking forward to working with Chris and Lisa and the team here in the commission on getting that done. Some of the questions that have popped up, especially in the last 12 months, is what's going on in the industry. We have dock-based bike share, which of course you have, which is a B-cycle product here in Ann Arbor. It's what we operate in Toronto, Detroit, Tucson, and Chattanooga, what you've also seen in cities like Chicago, New York City, Washington, D.C. In terms of the docked bike share programs. 96% of all trips in North America are still taken by docked-based programs. You might have also heard of dockless-based bicycles in the last year. That's been kind of the shiny hot topic within shared use mobility. Although we're always open to new modes of transportation in the shared use economy, especially on the bike share side of things, it's our philosophical beliefs. I think we've seen that played out mostly in 2018, that kind of dock-based is here to stay, and dockless has gone a little bit by the wayside. A lot of the folks that came in the last year, Spin, Ofo, Mobike, into North America and placed their bicycles in cities have already pulled out of the market and the industry in North America completely. The business model isn't sustainable, and the product, as the Seattle Times reported, is certainly not reliable. So happy to answer any questions, but I know that's something that's been on the minds of a lot of the folks in the commission and want to make sure I address that today. How are we moving forward? Let's talk about that briefly. As I mentioned, we have local executive staff from Shift Transit, local to Michigan, less than an hour drive away. Omari is going to be our regional general manager for both the MOGO and the Arbor bike system. We are proposing currently a early spring 2019 relaunch. We are working on some things currently with Chris's partnership to get that done as soon as possible. I have launched systems in the past all times during the year, and I will say relaunching a program in the late fall or what's now the winter time, it doesn't generate necessarily the most excitement when it comes to bike share programs. So we want to capture some of that excitement with some free ride days and some launching around when the weather is starting to turn. We are proposing something a little bit different. We would like to, and we've already started the conversations with Chris. Chris has then already started some of the conversations with the folks in Ann Arbor about having the program run year-round. I was certainly thrilled to hear some of the conversations we just had about bike lanes. I've already seen numerous bikers today, and I brought the cold with me from Chicago, biking through the infrastructure of downtown Ann Arbor. Most bike share programs in North America are year-round programs. Just this morning in Chicago, there was on the Wells bike lane, there's 10 folks at a red light biking downtown in the Loop. So we'd love to do what we can. I realize there are some constraints, whether it's either local partners or whether it's snow removal. We'd like to work with the commission and work with Chris to see if we make this a year-round program, just to make sure we have momentum and have those folks that are paying for the memberships being able to use the program year-round. So more on that to come. When it comes to getting people to use the program, we have a corporate director of marketing out of our Toronto program who will be focusing a lot of time on putting together the playbook that we've used in all our cities to get the results that we have, much like in Toronto and Detroit, with getting folks on the bicycles, using them frequently, free ride days, social media, local partnerships, events, et cetera. So we'll be working with Chris and the team to make sure we do that right out of the gate. Perhaps a little bit premature, but I also do want to talk about Ann Arbor as a bicycle city. Just due to some of the standard demographics we see, density, population, Chris alluded to this, we do see a future down the road for more than the 14 stations that are here. So we want to keep that on the radar, that we've done the analysis. We do work with a variety of different planning companies. If we want to dive deeper into that, I do understand that there is some potential feasibility studies going on for the future of the program as well. There's an RFP out for that right now. But we do see a future more than the 14 stations currently, and see how we can create a more dense fabric of biking and shared bicycling here in Ann Arbor. Also, as Chris mentioned, kind of the core to what we do is the customer experience. So at the end of the day, we are a services and a customer experience company, and you might ask what Shift does and what Shift's role in this is, and it's a soup to nuts experience. So we do everything from making sure that there's bicycles and dock points available for customers. So if we have a busy day, we make sure that the bicycles go from station A to station B, what we call rebalancing. We make sure that we check each bicycle on a monthly basis for safety. There's a multi-point inspection that Omari and his team will take on every single bike that's in use. We also take care of all the marketing, any customer experience or customer service inquiries via the phone, social media, email, and then everything we do is completely transparent. We'll put a monthly report together and give all that information to Chris, and that's available for anyone on the commission via Chris whenever you like. We're excited to work with B-Cycle. That's the product you have here. I personally have worked with a variety of different bicycles, software platforms when it comes to bicycle share throughout North America. We're already in discussions, and we with Morgan and the team over at B-Cycle. She's the director of operations, and certainly see no issues working with them going forward as we're moving down the path with just some of the kind of the back-end red tape agreements that everyone needs to put in place to make sure the program moves forward. So with that, thrilled to be here. Thank you very much again. As Chris mentioned, we're happy to answer any Q&A you might have today. Thank you.
Well, I can start with a couple of questions. I'm just wondering if there's plans for future expansion to cover disability issues that would include using tricycles and e-bikes in Ann Arbor.
Sure.
I'll grab that one to start.
Sure.
So, yeah, we've certainly, that was not a piece that was even on the table when the system was originally procured in 2014. And that's a conversation we've already had. MOGO operates some of those as vehicle assists or other vehicle model types in order to be able to accommodate different abilities. And we're already in discussions with them in terms of how that might be able to be best applied to this system. B-Cycle does not directly manufacture anything like that right now, so there's a bit of an operational challenge, but it's one we're certainly, we've noted and are definitely getting ready to take that one on.
Including the tricycles?
Yes.
Great. Other questions?
I've been down to MOGO a couple times, so I'm happy to see that you guys are taking this over. What I know of bike share is that it tends to not be user fee sustainable, that you need to have some sort of sponsorship or program that's backing it. I'm just curious to hear like how you guys foster that and what sort of you envision for Ann Arbor.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'll defer to Chris on kind of how it was set up, and I think it was set up through the procurement process and our response to the RFP. There's some guidelines that I think set up the program for success, with having some initial subsidies and decline in future years. But your point's absolutely correct, where it's essentially on us to make sure that we're boosting user revenues through our marketing programs, and also working with local sponsors, advertisers, et cetera, to make it really a robust community program. But you are correct. It's a very rare scenario where the user revenue, the sponsorship, and the advertising alone can sustain the program long term. As a transportation commission, as you know, a lot of, almost everything we do in the transportation world has some sort of assistance or subsidy. And bike share is really no different. But I think the way that they've set it up is pretty sharp. We saw that during the procurement process.
Yeah, I think from our procurement standpoint, one of the things we said is that the level of marketing and sponsorship that the previous operator was able to secure wasn't sufficient for long-term operations, and that's one of the reasons why we went out for a professional bike share firm to be operating the program. So we put a lot on them on the proposers process to say this has to happen in order for this to work. That's not something any of us as civic partners can truly take on or take on and do well. So we did create a floor of civic partner subsidy to make sure that we had operations and were able to do an appropriate relaunch. But we do expect over time that's a portion that should shift more towards the marketing and sponsorship end, and obviously with increased ridership come increased fares. And not that we'd ever completely exit from the process as long as it's a functional and working program, but to know that there needs to be a better balance than what we've previously been able to achieve.
Thank you. You spoke to the future of dockless and that dock is here to stay for now. Do you have any sense of whether or not we need to move or relocate the docks we have currently? You talked about expansion, but what about the stock we have today?
Yeah, so again, conversations that Chris and I have had multiple times, and also a robust discussion on that. Today, I think the way that we're looking at it is we're going to continue to do an assessment and probably at some point have a kind of a formal thoughts on what we'd like to do with the stations. I think there's a lot of good work that's already been done at the locations so far, but Chris?
So I'm going to break that into two segments. And Steve, maybe you want to speak a little bit to the university side of this, but there are kind of two permitting processes that we have to go through, one for the stations located on the university campus and the ones that are not located on the university campus. So from the university campus standpoint, there was a very long, robust part when the program was initially launched on where those locations were going to be sited. And I think from the usage data, generally those are still the right locations to have. And to go through a university process on reciting those is probably going to take more time than is appropriate in order to put us in a relaunch process. The stations that are in the city right-of-way will have to be re-permitted through that process, and so when that permit application comes up, if we do end up having to make any adjustments in those locations, we'll end up making that proposal with the permit process. Just from a gut feel, something will continue to be done by the Blake Transit Center, something will continue to be in Carytown. Where we go from there, I think, is a couple of open questions, whether Main and Washington continues to be the right location, whether City Hall continues to be the right location. I think we're going to have some more partner discussions at that process as well, but that's kind of the way we're looking at it is it's going to take us a little bit to put that all together. But we do believe that if there's adjustments, it's going to be minor. We do also have a 14th station that has yet to be sited. Originally, that was to be at Washtenaw and South University by the Rock. That's going to involve some concrete pouring if we continue to go down that location. So we at least have one station that we've still got floating in the mix that we're looking to site, and that may be a better opportunity for where we want to take the next round than reciting the stations we have currently.
That'd be something that's within the scope of our contract or something that's in the self-interest of Shift? How do we make sure that the docks go in the right locations moving
We are
forward?
completely deferential to Chris and the team about where is best for the community. So that's a terrific question. That's actually, some other operators have wrestling matches over where the stations go in terms of either it's maximizing revenue or maximizing ridership. We are completely in lockstep with Chris and whatever is best for the city and the locations, and we're going to be supportive of that.
Great. Well, thank you and welcome to the community.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yes.
So I was curious about the placement for, once we start looking at expansions, I'm curious what kinds of information you're going to be using to help inform those decisions, and especially whether you'll be considering things like areas of the city where there's maybe less access to transit, where there might be a higher need for those kinds of new kinds of mobility.
So I think a lot of that is going to come out of the Watts study for the future of bike share and where those potential growth locations are. But to that end, that's why we're going to leverage the expertise of Shift in that process and take a look at that information, the demographics, where we know those areas are underserved, where the infrastructure is already in place. I think it's going to be a pretty holistic look. And that's why the civic partners remain engaged in the process, because between our 4 organizations, I think we've got enough expertise in the process to be able to say, at least put together a pretty reasonable proposal on where an expansion would need to go and hopefully take good advantage of the data that the Watts study will bring forward.
We're about out of time for this process, but go ahead.
One, I just want to say thank you for considering year-round operation. I was a user of the system before it went away and was always disappointed to see the bikes go. Similarly, there's multiple instances where I was on one side of town late at night and I couldn't use a bike. I'm wondering if you've thought about having the hours of operation extended.
Yeah, so in
They
terms
shut
of,
down at midnight, I think, before.
yeah, so a discussion we haven't exactly had with Chris yet. Our other systems are all, so just for a clarified question, so if you went up to a station at 2 in the morning, you couldn't unlock a bike. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I'll certainly defer to Chris, but our other stations run 24/7.
Yeah.
Other systems, excuse me, run 24/7.
Yeah, that'd be great. And just briefly, there's been a lot of these different operators showing up, discussions around standardization of access to data in terms of trips and information about vehicles and that sort of thing. Have you guys been involved in any of those discussions or watching those developments or figuring out how to make that kind of data available in a standardized way?
Yeah, so we'd love some clarification on the discussions you're talking about, but from
Yeah.
our standpoint, and also as part of the RFP process and part of our contract, and what I mentioned earlier, we're very open with all sorts of data. I think some of the information that you were mentioning in terms of how we think about siting future stations, I think it's imperative that we share data in terms of origin, destination, routes, usage, time of day, et cetera. So we're really an open book when it comes to that kind of stuff. And one of the things that Chris is wrapping up is his agreement, the renewed agreement with B-Cycle, just to make sure that all that data is accessible and available both to us and to Chris.
And as far as I'm concerned, numbers and numbers and numbers, as long as we can come up with the right numbers, we'll find a way to get the data into the right places.
Great, thanks.
So, question regarding the number of stations. I guess in your proposal to Ann Arbor, what did you identify as sort of like the ideal number of stations for a community of this size of, population and density? Are there similar correlates, and what is kind of, in your view, the necessary kind of point that we need to reach in order for it to be broad enough and successful enough?
Yeah, so I would like to, with a little bit of a caveat to reserve judgment after 6 months into the program, just to kind of get a little bit more of the living the field. But I think Tucson is a comparable long-term program. We have 36 stations there. It is also a college town. Ann Arbor has a much higher density, frankly. So we're also looking in the next couple of years to expand that program. I think 30 stations minimum for Ann Arbor would make a ton of sense. So I don't want to speak out of turn here, but the density, being a college town as well, I think there's a real, hopefully there's an appetite long-term to expand the program and make bike share not only for certain parts of the city, but for the entire city. And it's, frankly, to me, it's a transportation network, right? It's how people, we want to influence and inspire people to get around using bike share on a daily basis. It's part of their commute and their lives, not necessarily as a kind of advanced bike rental program.
How many does Chattanooga have?
Chattanooga is 38 at the moment.
Okay, population-wise, it's much.
Population is much similar. The population Tucson in numbers obviously way out of whack, but if you look at the downtown area and the density, Tucson's also huge and sprawling. But I think the correlation from a population standpoint, of course not, it's way out of whack, but there are a lot of similarities there in how we do things. Climate's not one of them.
And to be fair to Shift, what we put forward as one of the constraints in the RFP was that the capital equipment was the capital equipment. There's not an existing fund currently scoped or placed in the tip to be able to expand the system. So if there is an expansion that would have to come forward beyond the 14 stations that have already been procured, there need to be that longer conversation with the civic partners, and then take a look at the funding mechanisms that would be available to fund that.
Absolutely, and we're, frankly, year one, we're laser focused, coming in, introducing ourselves to the community, building ridership on the existing system, reintroducing it to the city, making sure people embrace it, use it, and then those conversations, frankly, would be able to happen after that. We need momentum first to be able to do that.
Any other urgent questions? Almost urgent? Okay.
Could talk about it all night.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you
and
very
for
much,
coming.
appreciate it.
Good luck. All right, I believe we'll get to hear from Nick on the driverless.
I think I'm taking over that role tonight.
Okay, the driver behavior.
So the report came out on the changing driver behavior study, which happened in 2017 and then into 2018. Dr. Van Houten kind of talks about the how it all started, and when he came to Ann Arbor, the things he was looking for. His team picked several sites, both to do the enforcement ad as well as just the monitoring and where his staff would monitor what happened there. He did set up a training session for the officers that were going to participate, which was the traffic unit. And then we had two crossing guards actually do the walking part as our decoys. So that he kind of trained everybody in that, and then we set out on the 5 enforcement waves. The first of those was strictly warnings, education. We can work with the engineering department as well as communications to kind of get the word out about the ordinance, how it was different from state law, and what we expected for compliance. And then we did the first phase in June of 2017. We issued 1,411 warnings during that 2-week stretch. Then we continued into August and September, then late October, we did enforcement of those 2-week periods. So those were mainly tickets issued. The numbers of tickets issued and stops that were made, dropped consistently as we moved through that process. We did a follow-up in May and early June of this year, and the numbers were, again, they dropped as far as violations observed. The second, or the last wave there in 2018, we had more in, as far as communications involvement. They did a short video, which Kayla was one of the stars of. And we had some flyers and some social media presence, and so I think that helped get the message out there that we were doing the enforcement, and then also that what we were looking for compliance. They did post the percentages of compliance throughout some major arteries in the city. Engineering did that, and so basically, long story short, it seems that Dr. Van Houten felt this was a success. I'm not sure if our numbers mirrored exactly what Gainesville, Florida did, which he did a lot of commenting on how we wanted to model it after that study. But our numbers of compliance did go up throughout the year and a half plus, or year-ish, enforcement and education and communications work. So I think I can answer some questions if people have questions.
Questions? Well, I have one question to start with, especially since you're doing the presentation. The report that I heard from people observing the studies, as well as I think it was mentioned in the report, that there are some people who just don't stop, even with the warnings that says we're about to enforce. There's police all over the place. If you're paying any attention at all, you know that it's coming. And yet those people were being pulled over quite frequently. And I'm wondering about your perception of, like, what in the world do we do with those people?
Well, I don't know if I can, I have ideas, but I'm not sure I can say them. There's a population of drivers that, people just in general, that they're focused on everything but driving. The big push now is distracted driving, and the texting has been a huge issue, but it's everything else. It's the radio, the stereos, CD players, anything else in the car, just having a conversation, so that the goal is to keep people focused on driving, and they're not. So whatever they're paying attention to, they either lose sight of where they're at, the pedestrian volumes. And I don't know if I have an answer for that. I've been a traffic cop for 15 to 20 years here, and I work 2 other places, and it's not unique here. It's everywhere. People are just focused on everything but driving. They're in a hurry to get to wherever, work, school, shopping, who knows.
And do you regularly stop people for distracted driving?
We do. I know the state police has a lot of different programs for special details to attack that. Our numbers for traffic enforcement officers are down a little bit right now because of the transition of the department, but yeah, we do stop those and issue tickets and warnings, and I just don't know if I have a good answer to how to stop it from happening.
Driver education.
Yeah.
But that'll take a few years, yeah.
So I wonder what you think about the long-term sustainability. I know that long-term effects was one part of this proposal, but my experience as a crosswalk user on Dexter, where I think compliance was very low to begin with, and then it improved a bit, but now I feel like it's gone back to the very low baseline. And I wonder, is there a strategy for periodically?
Well, part of Dr. Van Houten's study was a follow-up, but I think he did 4 years afterward in Gainesville, and that might be too long to wait here. But I think enforcement's only one part of this. We have to work closely with engineering and and communications to educate. And I think if we can keep that going, and I think Raymond's been a huge asset to the city as far as getting all that work together. And I think if we could keep that part going, and then once our department itself stabilizes a little bit with hiring and that, and we can focus more effort on the enforcement side in addition to the education and the engineering.
Yeah.
I appreciate Sergeant Clark's input. You know, changing culture is hard, and there's the hardscape that goes with it, and changing how we consider what our roads are used for. And it's got to be an incessant, non-changing, consistent message about not only how we enforce, but how we engineer and educate. And it's just one of those things I think that you don't give up, but it is, culture change is hard. And whether it's people who are distracted or people who inherently feel entitled to go 10 miles above the speed limit, we just need to keep pushing. And you know, your input to both the public and the council is important to make sure we don't lose sight of the goal in the end. But we can't, you know, in for a penny, in for a pound. We can't do this halfway.
Another question from the report. I was a little bit confused. It was making reference to signage, the compliance signage being helpful. And I think they were saying that they've done that in other cities, not in Ann Arbor.
You talk about the percentage of compliance that?
Yeah.
I know that.
But they directly attributed some of the success to those signs.
I think we got a late start with those, if I recall correctly. I think there were some challenges with engineering getting them posted, but from what I was understand from Dr. Van Houten during the initial startup of this, was that was had some influence on increasing compliance, was seeing that number change, and people focused on that number a little bit as they drove past it. And I don't think that happened as well here because we got such a late start, but
so these
I
are
personally
electronic signs?
No, they're not electronic.
Okay.
They went out and got changed, I think, either weekly or every other week. And I don't know how effective they were here because of the late start, and I don't think it happened as exactly like Gainesville.
Okay.
As someone who fielded some constituent questions about them, I can say they were useful in that people asked what they were, and I was able to tell them why we were doing it. And so, at the very least, it got people talking about it. I don't know as if that's the most effective way to get people talking about changing their driving behavior, but at least it was one mode.
And is that a plan to keep changing them, or are they still up?
I think they're down. I haven't noticed them, and
Okay.
I imagine if we do the 4-year thing, or if we do it sooner than 4 years, we would consult with engineering about putting them back up.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Will this study also go to City Council? You guys have a copy of it then? or-
Hey, Kayla, I don't know, or Brandon?
No, I believe right now it's just presented to you all for informational purposes. We could, at Mr. Lazarus's direction, put it as a communication in the city administrator's report or something to that effect.
I think we can count on that.
I'd suggest the more information, the better.
Yes. All right, thank you very much for stepping in.
You're welcome.
Raymond's talking about 7th Street now.
I am. All right, Madam Chair. You have included in the packet a little bit of backup related to North 7th Street. I've reported a little bit on this in the past. As you may recall, when 7th Street was resurfaced south of Huron to Scioto Church, there was incorporation of some bike lanes and a slight buffer as well was able to be squeezed in. And then as that project was ongoing, we had heard some requests to consider a bike facility north of Huron, between Huron and Miller. And so throughout the summer, starting in July, we did a series of public outreach events where we kind of discussed 4 different considerations, ranging from kind of preserving more of the existing condition with keeping on-street parking all the way to eliminating on-street parking in favor of buffered bike lanes or even a cycle track option. And so we went out through several different public engagement processes, which included, we had pop-up events at the city civic band concert out at West Park, as well as the farmers market in Carytown, as well as here at City Hall one evening. We had an online survey that was posted as well, again asking what people's preferences were there of those 4 different design concepts. And then ultimately, since some of the concepts included possible removal of parking, it's standard practice for the city to ask adjacent property owners whether or not they would support removal of existing parking if that were to move forward. And that's typically presented to City Council, because removal of on-street parking requires action by City Council if it's of a certain length, as I understand it, if it's a block or more. So weighing all the different public comment that we got, we're currently contemplating moving forward with concept 1, which is more closely resembles what's currently out there. So keeping the existing on-street parking in favor of a buffered bike lane on one side of the street and a share the road arrow condition alongside the on-street parking. We did contemplate some other suggestions that had come up during that public engagement process, including a concept where there's parking on both sides of the street to create kind of a traffic calming effect. We consulted with the Tool Design Group and some others about whether that design concept would work. And there was just some concern about the way people parallel park. Some people are better at parallel parking than others. And so if you have kind of the 2 pinch points and people aren't parallel parking very well, it could actually create too much of a choke point, too much of a pinch point, and create a different unintended safety concern with kind of cars coming into oncoming traffic approaches. And then the other one we looked at was a variation of concept 1, where we were to shift the on-street parking away from the curb and allow the on-street parking to provide the buffer for the bicycles. And again, one of the reasons why we had difficulty making that work is the amount of buffer that would be required for where people parallel park, and making sure people don't parallel park into the bike lane was a challenge that we kind of grappled with. And then avoiding kind of the door zone as well was something we grappled with, and we couldn't really make that design concept work. So the report you have before you just kind of details all the public comment we received and why we're moving forward with the direction we are considering concept 1. I will say, you're the first that we're vetting this idea with. I think many of you have been following this. We've been giving updates periodically on it. And so we haven't, this is kind of the first public unveiling of what direction we're headed or where we're thinking about going. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have. I'd be happy to entertain any, direction you want to provide to us on this. Yeah, so I'd open up for questions now.
There we go. So it looks like concept 1 was the most popular in the public engagement period, and is that why concept 1 is sort of the one that's being recommended?
Yeah, we really were trying to balance, the different considerations of some of the neighborhood concerns, as well as trying to provide a facility that ties into the regional bicycle network. And so when we went out and asked the opinion of respondents at each one of the public engagement opportunities, concept 1 kind of came out ahead. Now the margins are relatively small when you look at the total number of respondents and what those points were assigned to them. It's anywhere, I think concept 1, when you add up all the points, equals like roughly 29% of all the points. And concepts, I forget, I think 4 was the lowest, was in the 21 or 22% range. So it's not a huge range between them, but again, showing, the preference that we had heard through the different public engagement mechanisms, that was the one that seemed to be the most supported.
I have a follow-up, possibly two. I'm wondering how the direction was chosen to have the bike lane versus the sharrow. So in concept 1 and concept 2, I think, one side has a buffered lane and one side has a sharrow, and I'm wondering
Sure.
how that got decided.
So a lot of it has to do with just what's the existing condition there. We had contemplated shifting the parking over to the other side of the street to allow for a better experience for like a climbing lane for the cyclist. Part of the problem with that is with the intersections of Willow and Bath and some of the other existing conditions you have, it's harder to put the parking on the opposite side of the street and still maintain the same number of parking spaces. And so just from kind of a design concept, putting the share the road arrow or sharrow alongside the existing parking there just was able to work out a little bit better, just, you know, in terms of making it all fit. You know, I appreciate the idea of, you know, allowing for the buffered bike lane for the climbing, especially as you approach the hill. We even contemplated kind of shifting the parking back and forth, but that didn't seem to work either. So we toyed around with a lot of concepts and we tried to incorporate as many of the different input that we got, but at the end we just couldn't make it work the way we wanted to, aside from what was concept one.
I guess I'm just going to express my disappointment that we can't get rid of on-street parking to really dramatically improve the cycling experience on that corridor. That's not a question.
Understood.
All right, Scott?
Can you describe a little bit how you weighted the responses? You said there's weighting factors.
Yeah, so the weighting factor, for those of you that took the online survey or attended one of the workshops, you know, there was a ranking of the 4 different concepts. You know, tell us which of the 4 concepts you like the most. And if I remember correctly, it was, you know, your number 1 choice, you pick, you know, 1, 2nd, 2, 3rd, and 4th. So we did kind of an inversion in points, so that, you know, the number 1 choice would get 4 points, the number 4 choice would get 1 point, and then we tallied it up that way. And so it's just, you know, there are many different ways we could have done it. It was kind of the most simple, straightforward way that we could come up with that we felt was kind of defensible in trying to capture the sentiment of what we heard from the public. You know, whether it's the perfect way to do the weighting, you know, I'm sure there are probably other ways we could have done it, but that seemed to be the most straightforward.
All right, and the sample here is just whoever showed up at a pop-up event or found out about the survey and filled it out.
Correct.
All right, and I think I've expressed this before, but I share the disappointment that, like, I think there's an opportunity here to make a connection to a network, and we're sort of throwing it out, and I think it's a real bummer. I'll also observe that as you described, the point counts for all of these are very close, and the other 3 are all like votes for a much better cycling infrastructure, and just a difference in preference on what that might look like. So, like, if my only concern was parking and I really didn't care about cycling, like concept 1, everything else, whatever. And I'm sure that's how a lot of people see it, and that's fine. We can have a difference of opinion here. But I think people who are interested in cycling infrastructure may not have seen it the same way, and so it split votes between some of these different options.
Sure.
So I'm not totally comfortable. Like, there's clearly a difference of opinion here, and it's controversial and it's difficult and contentious, and this would have to go to council, and I don't have confidence this council would necessarily support removing the parking here if it was contentious. But I think if we're serious about Vision Zero, we're serious about tackling climate change, we're serious about you know, making our streets work better for more people and making sure people aren't dying. Like, this is really not like a great direction to go in. Like, and I think it's too timid. But you know, hopefully we can figure out how to build a political will.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Hess, for your work on this and to your entire team. I appreciate the broad community engagement that was done, regardless of the output. I think it's important that we have these conversations and put different scenarios in front of people whenever possible. I suppose a question for any of staff: how much of this is paint on the ground and could be changed at a later date?
It's almost entirely paint on the ground.
Okay, thank you.
So I just have one comment that I'll add, which is, at a minimum, it seems to me like the main safety problem is getting up those hills on either side of 7th. Approaching Miller, or else approaching Huron, and being a bicyclist being trapped halfway or worse down the hill and not being able to continue the momentum to get to the top. So even though I use an e-bike now, I'm painfully aware of that issue, particularly going up towards Huron. There's more traffic that way, it seems. And if there was any way to do a bike box or to somehow allow bicycles to have that space to be able to continue up the hill, that would be a start. And yeah, hopefully in 5-10 years, something will change again. But if that was at all possible, I think that would make a difference. And that concept of it, there are some unique physics involved for bicycle traffics. And that's going to be true on William Street when that's changed into the bicycle boulevard as well, at least at the beginning of the hill from First.
I want to echo some things. Raymond, thanks for taking your time on this. I guess one of my overriding questions is, how soon does this have to go in if it's just paint and it's basically the same design as what's there, but additional stripe? Can we take a little more time on that? And then, because some of these ideas that are being thrown around, for instance, the uphill bike lanes, that was something that we had mentioned and talked about. Downhill, you don't really need a bike lane. It'd be great if it said may use full lane, which is illegal in Michigan apparently, but something like that. So I do want to clarify as well what Scott was saying, basically that if you look at this in another way, parking lost soundly 3-1 for less or no parking, and yet the parking is winning out. I understand it. I'll let the cat out of the bag. I'm the one who recommended we look at putting parking on both sides, because for me, it's most important in front of that park to slow cars down. So it's ironic that it's not necessarily the parking, it's the idea of parallel parking that is shutting down that option that I personally see as the best way to make that feel like a residential community street again and slow people down in front of that intersection. So if we are going to move on it, I would urge us to think about how to slow people down in front of that park through bump outs, through creative treatments and crosswalks and that intersection. That intersection from the park that heads further north is also a popular bicycle route through the residential area. So any way that we can make that crossing at 7th better would be great. And I would love to see possibilities for the uphill bike lanes. I mean, that's where it's needed most.
Mm-hmm.
That should really be a corridor where people can take the lane all but that uphill section.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah, understood. I will, if I may piggyback off something you said, a lot of the people that we heard from the neighborhood that were interested in keeping the parking, obviously there are houses that don't have driveways and see the need for that parking. But then another thing that was brought up often was, the traffic calming effect that on-street parking provides and how that was desirable for that purpose, in as much as the parking element of it. So I think, there is a concern about kind of the speeds that are going through that corridor and trying to find ways to, make sure we tame the traffic as it goes through there. So, yeah, something we heard from the neighborhood.
Thank you very much for continuing to bring it back.
And thank you for your input.
Yes. All right, so we'll move on to our next item, which is to appoint 2 people to the micromobility committee that we approved last time. And one of them you got in your packet fairly early, and then the other one was a fairly late addition, so I apologize for that. And so what I'd like to do is have a motion to appoint these 2 people. Kayla has their names.
Lisa Solomon and David Schinnebarger. Did I pronounce that right, Scott? David?
I don't know how to.
Okay.
Sorry.
You were right.
Schinnebarger?
And after the motion, if there's any discussion or questions about these people?
Oh, yeah, this isn't actually about those people, but I just had the Commission on Disability Issues meeting, and some people there were expressing interest in this and particularly about like the lack of accessibility and like these obstructing pedestrians. And I'm just wondering if there's a avenue for someone from there to participate. I'm not sure it would be me because I see this meets in the middle of the day, and I don't know that I want to take on yet another midday thing.
They can absolutely participate the way it is right now because public are welcome and they can comment before any committee meeting.
So they don't have to be members.
Right. But if they want to be a member, then they'll have to do is contact Kayla or myself. But they wouldn't be appointed until the next meeting.
I see, yeah.
But absolutely, they can participate. And also give written comments to Scott, who is leading this particular committee,
Okay.
or any other way that they want to.
All right.
So, a motion. Who wants to move? Okay,
Fern.
you're moving the, yes. Seconded by Scott. Everybody clear about the motion, that this is to appoint the two names? I'm bad with names, so. Okay, any discussion? Great, then all those in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great.
And I'll just announce that the first meeting of the Micromobility Committee will be on Monday, November 19th, and that is open to the public. It's scheduled at 11 a.m., and that's here in the second floor council workroom, so right behind us for those of you that will be participating at that meeting.
Great. And I'd like Kayla to introduce our next item on the agenda then.
Okay. So the next item is the fiscal year 20 policy agenda. So you received this in your homework guide. So the City Council Policy Agenda Committee identifies items from boards and commissions to help prioritize their initiatives. So the commission is asked if there are any priority items that you would like to pass along to the Policy Agenda Committee to bring those forward. And information was included in your agenda packet with examples of what was in the FY18 policy agenda. I didn't receive any, I think I included information that you could submit your ideas in advance, and I didn't see any. If I missed that and anyone sent them in, let me know. But now's the time if you'd like to raise those here tonight or continue thinking about this. I think we have until December 21st to get them back to the commission's coordinator, and so we could discuss this again at December 19th meeting if needed.
Yeah, I did have one idea. I actually saw this. I just saw it after the deadline you gave, so I figured it was too late. And but the one idea I had to add is the transit-oriented zoning about like increasing like allowed density near transit. And I know that's been brought up before.
Kayla, could you provide a little bit more context for what this actually, maybe there was something that I didn't read, or how we can?
And if it's a question about transit-oriented development, I'd be happy to speak to it as well. Sitting on the planning commission, Mr. Trudeau could as well.
Did Mr. Lazarus,
Well,
did you?
my question then is, are you more interested in why we're doing this or the specifics about TODs?
My question is mostly especially the transportation stuff, it's monitor funding from state, county, federal. City isn't involved in there. So this isn't about city funds necessarily, or is it? Like whose agenda is this? Is it this?
So I worked with council a couple of years ago to start a policy agenda committee with the intent of getting some consistent guidance and some authorization to start working more actively with our elected delegations at the state and federal level.
Okay.
So that was the intent. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us to push harder than we have in the past.
Yeah.
Some of it's got to do with change in administration, but with the hiring of an assistant city administrator who's going to be more active in monitoring and updating status and pursuing things, particularly that are introduced at the state level. We're going to wind up pushing a lot harder to lead rather than follow at the state level, and also pursue opportunities with our federal delegation. I am turning over my seat on the Michigan Municipal League Finance Policy Committee to the Assistant City Administrator, and taking on a role, I hope, with the Transportation Infrastructure Policy Committee. So it's an opportunity, I think, for us to understand through council what they want us to pursue, push it a little bit harder, and then help kind of form and lead coalitions throughout the state to address things that we'd like to see. I think one example of what came out, while it wasn't exactly what we wanted, was the statewide discussion on vulnerable users. On the energy side, we also pushed with others to address tax treatment of residential solar systems. So we want to do this every year with the update of the budget so that we can pursue policy objectives consistent with the overall vision and financial objectives that council establishes.
With that in mind, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'd like, Kayla, if you wouldn't mind sending out a reminder about when that deadline is due, because I'm sure that we're going to have more thoughts about that. Just two off the top of my head, I would love to see MDOT and the state adopt a Complete the Streets, or even better, Vision Zero policy when it comes to road construction. And then there's some signage specifically for cyclists that is not approved by the Michigan Vehicle Code, but is in almost every other state's vehicle code that I would like to see back in. So I can think
And those are great examples of things that we should and can pursue as they get adopted. And again, the idea is to have a consistent messaging, so those are some great examples of things that we should be pursuing.
Great, thanks.
I think the use of the words Vision Zero and advocating for that are pretty important for our next year, looking for safety opportunities and Vision Zero policies and infrastructure.
I just want to add one note. There's been an awful lot of discussion about fixing the darn roads, and I think the discussion has to include a definition of what that means. And I would hope that from this commission, that would mean not just addressing pavement condition, but fixing the roads for all users and the appropriate use of the right-of-way for all means.
I like that. Okay, any other comments? It sounds like we're going to continue to, or start providing Kayla with some information. All right.
So the next item is the 2019 calendar of meeting dates. I can pull that up if that's helpful. So these are the proposed meeting dates for 2019. I think we were actually able to meet on the third Wednesday consistently. There is one potential conflict still being worked out. I've proposed here that we stay consistent with our third Wednesday. The February meeting, however, does conflict with a meeting that Planning Commission has already scheduled, but I've contacted them and they are looking for an alternate date to reschedule their February 20th meeting. We ran into a lot of these last year with one commission bumping another commission, and we were going to try to do better so we can keep a consistent date, and it will be more helpful for the general public that's interested in attending meetings, that they can depend on the Transportation Commission to be the third Wednesday, Planning Commission to be second Tuesday, wherever they meet. So I've proposed your calendar that way, and I think that if you would like to make your motion today to adopt your calendar, then in the event that they are not able to adjust their February 20th meeting, we would need to revisit this, but I anticipate that they've informed me that they're looking for an alternate date. So these are the dates proposed. If you have any questions, we can talk about that.
I'll take a motion to adopt this calendar. Okay, second. All right, are there any discussion or?
Who was the second? I saw Kleinman. Oh, who was the motion? Boland and then Kleinman.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any discussion necessary? And we've been doing a pretty good job of letting Kayla know in advance when you're not able to attend, so I appreciate that. All right. Then, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, we have a calendar. And we'll work in expiring terms and all that kind of stuff as well. But that will be relevant. All right, so back to the agenda.
I think Raymond is up for the staff report and updates.
All right.
All right, Madam Chair and members of the commission, I'll just go through our typical practice where I'll highlight some of the changes and some other late breaking news things. Again, the report is included in the backup, and so I'll just highlight some of the changes that have been made from last month to this month. One of the first things I wanted to highlight is on page 2, there's discussion about the North Maple Road restriping. This is the road diet project. One of the things that we were going to do at the end of November or early December was a public workshop on where to put crosswalks. We are having difficulty finding a location along the corridor that doesn't conflict with a school event. We're looking at Hazley and Abbott and Skyline as possible meeting locations, as well as the library. And we've just had a lot of difficulty finding a location where we don't have a conflict to make that work. So stay tuned. We're still committed to having that workshop. Again, the idea is, help us identify. We didn't put it in crosswalks. We put the ones back that were there previously. But we know there's a need for other crosswalks. I know we've gotten a lot of requests for around the Alano Club. And we want to, hear from the public in terms of where those crosswalks should be located. We're going to do that through a workshop setting. So stay tuned. As soon as we have a date settled, we'll let all of you know, and we'll push it out on our website as well. So more to come on that issue. Moving on to page 4, there's a little bit of discussion, some update related to the Fuller Road sidewalk extension. You'll note, I think at last meeting, we were gearing up for the latest round of public engagement. We had a pop-up meeting at the high school on October 17th and received over 115 feedback forms. We were really astounded by the amount of input we got from high school students. And then there was another public meeting held on November 1st as well. And that summary feedback is being posted to the project website. We are expecting to take this back to City Council at their November 19th meeting for additional direction from them in terms of how to proceed. Similarly, with the Ann Arbor STEAM Safe Routes to School project, I'm on page 5, about midway through. We are expecting to take that back to City Council at their next meeting on November 19th as well. Again, I think many of you are familiar with this project. It's about the special assessment to put sidewalks in around the neighborhood to connect to A2 STEAM. And we've had, some additional opportunities for, discussion and dialogue on that project. There is some additional information on page 6 related to the Ann Arbor Station. There was a grant application at the federal level for design possibilities for an Ann Arbor station. The project was called the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvement Grant Application. We did throw together a grant application and put that in. So we'll see, how that shakes out. We don't expect announcements for that for several weeks, if not several months to come. So I don't expect an update on that anytime soon, but just wanted to let you know that we did submit that grant application. All right. We already talked about the driver behavior study, so that will probably kind of turn into just a standing item from your report here on out. The traffic calming program, again, you may recall this was, we worked very closely with a subcommittee of this commission worked really hard on kind of coming up with some, a program that was acceptable and was approved by this. It went to city council, didn't garner enough votes for it to pass. We took what we thought we heard from council, incorporated some changes, brought it back before this commission at your last meeting. You approved those changes, and that is now going back before city council at their next meeting on November 19th. Again, looking for them to possibly adopt that at that meeting. On the transportation plan update, there's no new language there. I did want to let you know that I think the contract got executed with the consulting firm this week. So we do hope to kick that off with the consultant probably in the next week or so, or the next coming weeks, I should say. That kickoff will be internal first with just their staff and city staff, and then we'll start developing, the stakeholder lists of who to engage and, what that process looks like. So you're going to start seeing this update start to populate with a lot more information on it. And again, we're very committed to keeping you in the loop on this project as it unfolds. Lower Town Study, we're going to be really busy at the November 19th meeting because Lower Town Study is also going before a City Council at their next meeting on November 19th. Again, this was direction we'd gotten from City Council earlier this year to go out and, come up with some concepts about how we can better address transportation issues affecting Lower Town and kind of the roads that feed into it. So we had done a competitive solicitation with a scope. As I understand it, OHM was identified as the preferred, at a staff level, the preferred consultant to move forward with that. And we're taking that before council for them to consider possible award of that contract to OHM. It is multimodal in nature. It is going to focus on all modes of transportation, but it's going to have a heavy data analysis component, a lot of modeling and a lot of simulation to go into that. So again, this will be another study. If it gets awarded, you'll see a lot of updates coming pretty frequently in this monthly update. And I believe that wraps up the updates I wanted to bring to your attention. I'd be happy to entertain any questions you have about the report in general. Oh, the one thing I did want to note is we attached at the end of the report you're used to a report from Ann Arbor Public Schools as well. So you'll note there is a report from Liz Margolis that talks about traffic safety considerations at Huron High School and Community High and A2 STEAM, as well as safe routes to school committees that are forming at 5 different schools, mostly elementary. And then there's traffic control orders as well that are identified there. So I probably can't answer any questions related to that specifically, but if you do have questions, feel free to lob them at me and then I can redirect them to Liz and follow up with you at the next meeting, or she can come prepared at the next meeting if she's available with a response to those.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chairman. I really appreciated having the school report at the end, too. I thought that was really helpful. So I just had a few comments about the Fuller Sidewalk Extension project, because I know that was kind of an emotional issue for a lot of people. And I really appreciated having it bumped to the November 19th council meeting so you could have these two more information gathering sessions. I was able to attend the November 1st meeting, so I heard what people were saying there. And so I checked the project website today, and all the feedback from the students is there, which was mostly positive, but the feedback from the November 1st meeting, which was pretty negative, is not up there yet. Okay. And so I just wonder if that's going to be made available to council. And also one thing that the people at that meeting wanted was to see the updated safety report that was done in October, the road safety audit, which we were told at the meeting that would be on the website too, but it's not up there yet either. And just to sort of summarize, I think the general concern was that because of the improvements that have already been made at the Fuller Road crosswalk, there's pretty incremental improvements by moving it, and the concern is that there are other crosswalk needs throughout the city that are more urgent.
Understood, yeah. So thank you for that input. I'll definitely go back and work with my staff to make sure that we get those other pieces uploaded. I wasn't aware that those weren't up there, so thanks for bringing that to my attention.
Quick, Raymond, too, on the Fuller crosswalk had some thoughts too, including like a crazy out-of-the-box idea after reading through the student comment. One, I was kind of wondering if, in terms of those student comments and how they're generated, were they given a discussion of why it was going to be moved and here's what it's going to look like, and then they could feedback to it? Or was it just unsolicited response on the possibility of moving it? And I ask that because the language of the responses is really interesting.
Right, so my understanding is the way it was set up, it was during lunchtime, and there was a table kind of off to the side, and so any student that wanted to come over could come over and provide their feedback. I can't remember, just because I wasn't at that meeting, what the question form was.
I wasn't at the meeting either, but I was involved with helping prepare for it, and there wasn't a discussion presented or a presentation given to the students. There were display boards with some information about the project, and I wasn't super closely involved, so I don't know even like what was on those display boards specifically. And then they had a feedback form that asked a couple of questions, like 3 or 4 questions, and there were smiley faces. They checked which one most resonated with them.
Yeah, I noticed some of the language was like cool and newer is better, and I was like, and I did notice that some of the concerns were similarly addressed, that people might still cross where the existing one is. Park access is a problem. I did learn from that feedback that some students like the idea of the crosswalk being closer to the school and getting across, and that's where the idea came in. If the safety audit with the updates comes back seemingly that things are much better at the existing, how much more would it cost to do both? Just leave the existing and add the one closer to the school. I imagine it's going to cost a lot of money to take out the existing and move it.
Right, so my understanding is some of the equipment that's at the existing crosswalk would be repurposed. So in particular, the rectangular rapid flashing beacon signs, the RFBs as we call them, those would, the new proposed location is to relocate those, and then, eliminate the existing crosswalk to make sure that people don't use it, including a barrier. I think that was a consideration for the school. And then, the relocation of the gateway signs as well. Now we've pulled a lot of those for winter maintenance, but so those are, I think a lot of the equipment was going to be repurposed. So I think keeping both would be a different capital equation that we haven't really factored out yet. Yeah, and the other thing I'll say is I did participate in part of the road safety audit on a very cold morning, which they're getting, again, I'm a transplant from a warmer climate, so I'm still getting used to these 20-degree mornings. But there were some behaviors at that existing crosswalk that I think are still a little worrisome. I think, my opinion, and this is just Raymond talking, is I think that crosswalk is probably better than a lot of other crosswalks than we have in the community. I think, the fact that there's RFBs, the fact that you have you have good signage, you have good pavement markings, you have, the gateway treatments. But some of the things that I observed was, the cars that are stacking and queuing up as they approach the intersection are blocking the crosswalk. And then people are some drivers are behaving badly in that they are using what are not turn lanes, but kind of going into oncoming traffic right by the crosswalk, in either to make the left turn by coming into oncoming traffic, or they use the Gallup Park right turn lane as an extension of the intersection turn lane, and will start turning way prematurely. And I think that's where some of the behaviors I observed were kind of raising an eyebrow for me. Like, people, because the queues are so long there, the vehicles are so long, that people are trying to get past that if they're making the turn by kind of cutting to get to those turn lanes. And so I think that's where, the new location is meant to help alleviate some of that. I understand, the point that Commissioner Boland brought up about, can this effort be redirected towards something else? And I think that's a point well taken as well.
But isn't this funded by a state grant?
It is, yeah. It's
And that
large-
grant money is not transferable to something else?
Right, yeah. So it's largely funded by a Highway Safety Improvement Program Fund grant that was received. And so, so I think that's the idea of having an improvement over the existing condition with the relocated. And you're right, we've heard kind of both sides for those that support it and those that are opposed to it.
Isn't there a geometry problem there too?
There is a curvature in the road. There was a tree that was blocking us sight lines previously that's since been removed. So some of those geometry problems are not quite as pronounced as they were a little while ago. But yeah, so.
I think the point is that there's funding from the state. If we don't proceed, we've sacrificed the grant. Not only do we lose this opportunity, but you get penalized in future grants. It was based upon the engineer's evaluation. And I know this is not a popular thing to say, but you don't always do engineering by democratic means. It's based upon the expertise of the licensed professionals. The truth is that if you cross the street there, you don't save any steps because there's nothing on the other side of the street. You still got to go down to the entranceway. So, with some good engineering to keep people from crossing there, I think we wind up with a safer solution. We talked before about bad behavior, and there's bad behavior at that intersection as it exists now that puts people crossing the street at risk. So those are I think the factors that went into the decision to pursue the grant and to move the crosswalk. And, that is what it is, and that's what will come to council on Monday.
I just do want to voice, I mean, I don't have that much skin in this game, but
No.
other people do that are around me. They don't like the crosswalk being moved for whatever reason. It's the process, though, that I at least want to make light of, and some of this, Raymond, you weren't here for. It was my understanding that this project initially went to City Council in a consent agenda item, and there was public outcry, and it got pulled out and postponed for more community input. And then suddenly there was a grant to do it from the state.
No, there was always a grant associated with the project.
When it first went to council, there was a grant attached to it?
I believe
This was
so.
like 16 months ago?
You're talking about right after Justin's.
Right after Justin's Kill?
There's no grant.
There was no grant.
I don't think the project was brought up at that point in time. The improvements that were made right after the fatal accident were done to address the immediate concerns.
Oh, okay, I can look again.
It's fine.
If the grant money has always been there, it's not that big a deal. But it just feels like we might be going down a road because there's money there, as opposed to this is the best route to go
Well, the
down.
money's there because I think it's the most sound solution.
Okay.
All right, any other comments on the Fuller Road part of this presentation? Other parts? I have a couple of comments. First of all, I was really tickled that on the Monday's meeting of the Washtenaw Biking and Walking Coalition, you used this handout as an informational basis for another group in the community. I thought that was great. And I certainly think that that's one of our roles is to help get this information out. And so I think I just really appreciate that, and I think you did a great job of being one of the keynote speakers at that event. So thank you. And my second question is, I drove down Pauline with the new lines, and I couldn't make any sense of what any of it meant. And so I'm just wondering, is that in progress, or do we have to learn a new language of what lines mean? It was so confusing and strange.
My understanding is that the long line work is done. So the long vertical parallel lines are done, but not the short line work. So the crosshatches, there's going to be a buffered bike lane there. So the crosshatches, similar thing happened when Maple was striped, as you may recall. Some of the early comments we got is, why did you put on-street parking here and then there's a bike lane on the outside? It's like, well, no, those two outside are actually the buffer. But it took us a little, because it's like a different painting crew. I don't know exactly the logistics, but it's a different crew that comes in and does the cross-hatching work as opposed to the truck that sprays the long vertical lines. So I think that is maybe, because there are like 3 lines, is that right? And that's
the bike
why?
line has another line going through it, I
Yeah.
think, and then later on it looks like a buffered lane, but on the
Right.
other side, there's a dashed line in the middle of
Oh, so the dashes are in now? Is that?
Yeah. On
Okay.
the north
You know, I
side.
haven't seen it since the dashes went in, so admittedly, I need to go back out there and look myself. I'll put, actually.
So there isn't a new concept, like the advisory bike lanes on 7th, I think people are understanding.
Right.
But this, I couldn't get this.
I'll look into that and I'll report back at next month. And if there's something new, I'll report back to you all.
Okay. And my third comment was just about the street lighting, that Robert had somebody approach him about coming to us to talk about pollution issues, light pollution issues in crosswalk lighting. And there was a great presentation about that at the Ignite presentation a few weeks ago also. And I'm just wondering, well, I'm just saying that should be an additional criteria in establishing street lighting in general, but especially crosswalk lighting, that we look at light pollution. And we
Yeah,
may or may
and-
not talk about it. No.
I believe there are discussions, I don't know if it's the Environmental Commission or the Energy Commission that is looking at some.
Planning Commission.
Planning Commission?
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilman. Yeah, so I think we're waiting to see how that shakes out and then take direction from that as we look forward. It's, you know.
Yeah, it wasn't listed as one of the criteria on your
Right.
report, so
Right.
I may be being very redundant.
No, and I think, you know, for what it's worth, my understanding is when we try to put in streetlights, especially for the crosswalks, which is our current focus, you know, a lot of times that's downward facing lights, and there's a lot of, you know, again, I'm not a lighting engineer, but, you know, there's a lot about the lumens and the temperature of the lighting and all of that, and trying to minimize, even if it's downward facing, there's still glare from the road that can bounce back up, and it's trying to find kind of that sweet spot. So I think once those standards are determined, if, you know, that moves forward, then it's something that'll become common practice, and as we update lights and as we, you know, change things out, we would do whatever that new
And we
standard
may or
would be.
may not want to have that be part of our agenda at some point.
If I could, I think the Planning Commission, given their domain, is land use and zoning on private property. I'm not sure that our conversation will extend to the public right-of-way, so that may be a valuable conversation for this body to have.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? All right, then thank you very much. And I believe we'll go to the liaison reports now. Is there any comments, any reports from people who are specific liaisons from organizations?
Well, I am with the Disability Commission, and I was just, I mean, I basically covered most of the stuff that there was some interest in the traffic calming and the, the bird scooters. And, yeah, I think that's about all I have to report. Just, I'll probably mention the bike thing to them because I think there might be some interest in that as well.
Great. Anyone else? All right, any communications from the individual commissioners? All right, then we move on to the next agenda items.
Sorry, actually, if I could.
Okay.
It's typical that City Council appoints new commission, committee, and board members in either the first or second meeting in December, and we'll be actually meeting after those meetings. While it is my sincere hope that I continue to work with you all, should I no longer be appointed to this commission, I just want to say it's been a distinct privilege. Your challenging of bad ideas and support for good ideas has been very welcome, and I think you've made everyone at City Hall, both professional staff and members of City Council, do their jobs better. So, thank you.
Thank you. I had a chance to tell your mother how great you were, so. I did that recently. We don't want to have you come off. All right, next agenda items.
I have a potential one that it's wrapped into a new group, End Dangerous Traffic on Liberty, that somebody had pointed me toward, and there's still concern, as the Speed Reduction Committee met, that Liberty and Miller, with their 35 miles an hour towards the outside of town, it's just too fast, and the crosswalks there need gateway treatments and that kind of stuff. I'd be curious to know what the history is behind. I think those are segments where we took away parking in order to put in bike lanes. I'm not positive, but neighbors seem to say that the speeds are faster. We had a pedestrian fatality there. I would love to hear how things are going, like sort of an update. Here's our speeds, 85th percentile, just an update on how that corridor is working.
Okay.
To see if that's an improvement or not.
Other agenda items, which you can always submit later as well. All right.
We also have in our work plan, our potential agenda item for December is to talk about next year's work plan. So I will plan on preparing a draft 2019 work plan, plugging in topics that have come up at different meetings, if there are things outstanding that that have been raised by commissioners but have not yet been discussed at a meeting, and then some other routine things that we've become accustomed to weighing in at certain points throughout the year. So I will prepare that for the December meeting. We also may be having other street resurfacing projects presented. It'll be either December or January. So today you heard about Hoover. There's also Stone School, Boardwalk, Traver Wood, and Platt that were identified by the CIP committee as resurfacing projects that you are interested in hearing about. So staff are working on preparing materials to be at a point where they'll have something worthwhile to come and get feedback on, either December or January.
Great. That's a huge amount of work. All right, if there are no objections, then I will call this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.